Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to once again what we have brought out of the archives, the good old fashioned Milling Mondays, where the request has been made to slow things down and walk through Autodesk Fusion toolpaths step by step, explaining in more detail what each path does, applications of the different options, and what better way to do this than to start off with square one, which is none other than doing setups. Create any of your toolpaths and post-processed toolpaths after the fact. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in this, and I know a couple of you guys have been waiting for this. If you're watching this at a later date or you're currently a live viewer, feel free to ask questions at any time. However, we are going to limit this to only creating setups. We will dive a little bit into machines and a few other things, but overall, our main focus today, strictly on our setups, how to modify, change, and even creating multiple setups and things that you may or may not already know. So let's dive into this. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as you guys can see, for all of you out there, you can pull this model from the default Fusion library in the CAM sample area, and you too can work along with this, pausing as needed. But as you're going to see is we're going to start off by one, we've already switched from the design over to the manufacturer workspace. And as you guys can see, we are in the milling tab. Now, the very first thing we need to do, of course, as the title says, is we need to create our setup. So as you're going to see me do here, the reason why I really like this part is because it's got a lot of caveats to it that aren't necessarily perfect. And if you're coming from another software, I may be using terms like Mastercam of the world coordinates up here in my top right, and how that difference from how Fusion looks at and understands. Now, the very first thing, it is my number one rule in the CAM workspace, is just like reading a book, we want to start top to bottom and a left to right kind of work. So what does that mean for you guys? Well, in a general overview here, in our very first tab, we are defining everything that needs to be done in a setup, as in our WCS positioning, what machine we're running on, even the setup itself, and then diving further into our stock, as well as our post-processing where we can front load certain items. So kicking this off, like I said, is starting from our top to bottom. As you guys are going to see is I'm going to go out and select a machine. Now, I highly recommend you guys do set up a machine. Your machine does not need to be super complex. If I'm doing 3-axis milling at the end of the day, I usually don't waste my time with full machine simulation. And we do have videos on that on our channel on how to build your own machine definition. I'm going to go ahead and grab this generic 3-axis mill that we've built out. From that, we are, of course, doing milling. And from here, one thing you guys can see is I need to now define my WCS. Now, this comes in a two-step kind of process, right? Step one is we need to define the orientation. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this menu out so you guys can see this. Currently, it's looking at the model orientation, or what would be referred to as the world coordinate, right? From here, though, I can simply tell the software, in most cases, as you guys can see, we have these little sections, is I need to tell it that I want to give it information. Now, this is where I need to define which direction my axes are pointed. Now, you have 3 options here, which is Z and X, Z and Y, X and Y. I would highly recommend if you are on a 3-axis vertical mill, we're going to go ahead and utilize Z and X. If you're doing something on a horizontal mill, you may look at doing something like Z and Y. Now, if you're more of a mold maker dealing with some weird shaped parts and profiles, you may need to do something a little bit more like X and Y. However, they all work the same out of the box. As you can see, my very first step was to define my orientation, and now my menu has changed things up. So the first thing it's asking me is which direction should I point my Z? Now, one cool thing inside of the setup area is the fact that Fusion wants to tell you what to do just by putting your mouse on it and waiting patiently. As you guys can see, this is actually telling me that I can define my Z axis right now by a face or an edge. The same rule of thumb would apply down below based on my X axis. I can go based on a face or an edge. So for Z, in the case of this part, maybe I don't have anything that is very clearly defined. Maybe I don't know if this is flat. So I'm going to utilize, in this case, my table. And just like that, you can see my Z-axis is shot up. Again, we have now automatically jumped down to our X-axis. So if, again, I'm going to pick a face here. Now I could pick an edge, but as you can see by defining a face, again, my X was already positioned in the proper direction. Now I can flip these at any time. There is some confusion out there with a lot of people is your tool is going to come down on Z. So Z positive in most cases is up on your machine, right? Again, same concept with X and Y. We want these to point in our positive direction of our machine. Now, this may be a little confusing for some of you, but if we were to take this part file here and I was to shift it to the left, on a lot of vertical mills, that would actually be traveling X positive because my tool would be over here. Again, X negative on my part, my tool would be over here. So it's just something to keep in mind that the X, the Y, and the Z always need to point towards our positive direction. So again, we're going to continue down our list. Again, if you guys wanted to see this, we could define our X-axis based on an edge. Now, again, we can flip these at any time if need be, but I'm getting really lucky on this part that everything is actually working with me. Traveling a little bit further down is where we start to talk about part 2. So again, part 1 is we kind of deal with our orientation. Part 2 is now we are going to deal with where do we want our WCS to be positioned. So if you are somebody that has the luxury of a probing system, top center of the stock box point. Now, this is where a lot of people are going to be a little bit confused. I've seen this is because in my opinion, Autodesk, I know you guys watch our videos. It'd be nice to move the model up, I believe. But as you're going to see right now, I have this giant yellowish orange box around everything because by default, Fusion thinks everything needs to be in my stock, which again, tends to confuse people a little bit. That's not the case because as you can see, based on a stock box point, if I go ahead and say what point I want to use, I now have these little nodes on that box. Again, a good way to think about this is if I actually turn off my model over in my design tree, you can see the only thing that we're worried about is where is it on the stock? Do I want to define the position of what would be your work offset or your G54 or E1 for a lot of you Fidal guys out here? And just like that, we are going to place that based on that location. Again, a lot of you guys that don't have probing systems, you might use what we would refer to as back left corner, top of the stock. That's where you're setting your work offset from using an edge finder, things of that nature. Now, we will see in a secondary setup, we might want to use a model location or a selected point if we want to pick up a specific bore, but we will see that later on with additional setups on our part. So again, we could just continue down our list. I'm going to go ahead and turn my model back on by clicking that I over here on the list left. Now, this is where we need to define the model at which we want to machine. I know this is going to be a little bit of a common habit for a lot of you is to pick a model on your actual part. Now, by default, a model is usually a body, but it is very wise, again, to utilize things like the design tree, which is why a lot of you out there need to be familiar with how designs work inside of Fusion. Because as you can see, we actually have what's called components. Now, what I would highly recommend is that you are selecting the component, which as we progress to our second setup later on, you're going to see why the component selection is so important. So again, as you can see, we have a component for our part, and then we do have a component for our fixture. Now, I am going to skip over fixture at first. We're going to come back to this. But as you can see, we could define a fixture separate from our model. So let's go ahead and turn the page. So now we're starting to dive into our stock definition. So from here, what I'm going to do, this is my recommendation. Some of you guys may think separately. I always recommend utilizing something like a fixed size. Now, you can do a fixed size cylinder on the mill. We have tubing. Again, we can even look at things from solids. And as you guys are going to see in my second setup, we're going to do what's called proceeding, which pulls from setup 1 into setup 2. So by default, we're on the mill. We're going to utilize nothing other than a fixed size box. The luxury to this, as you guys can see, is I can nominally type in all of my different stock size. Now, this is important. I have an old habit that does not want to die, that I get very quick to jump to stock before I orientated my actual WCS system. So these two are tied together at the end of the day, that if I failed to get my X the right direction and I adjust my X stock, you'll notice that nothing is participating or working correctly. Again, number one rule, left to right, top to bottom, right? Moving a little bit further down, you guys will notice is once you get that actual length correct, we can always adjust. Is it offset from one side or the other? Or as you guys will see in our Y, front and back, or my most favorite one, of course, in the case of this part, we may want to actually offset from top and then give that whatever dimension we are looking to just skim off the top of our part. Now, I am going to use my view cube to square up here. And as you guys can see, this is one of the highest points on my model. I'm going to go ahead and adjust that out to like 0.1. You'll notice my stock has now shifted up to 0.1. Again, whatever your plans are to face off the top of this part, obviously you are going to adjust accordingly outside of that. Again, something kind of handy down here is you're seeing model dimension. Had we looked at this the opposite way with relative size box, you're going to notice we're rounding up stock sizes, and now we're looking at a stock dimension down here, which will be a little hard to dial in to give you what would normally be nominal values. So again, I'm going to go back to my fixed size. We have our offset from top. Our stock is looking good. Let's go ahead and look down on this part. As you guys can see, a little tricky to see here, but just over top of my head, we have a square block of material. It's almost the exact size as my part. Maybe somebody in the front office ordered something a little bit thicker, so they want a little bit bigger block, maybe 5 by 25. Again, as you're seeing in real time, we are updating our stock size. So from here, we've kind of completed our list. Now, in a perfect scenario, you guys are probably wondering, yes, you would have went X, Y, Z, not backwards up the list like yours truly, but I want to make sure you guys have different systems. So from here, some of you are going to notice upon selecting a machine, you now have a part position. We're not going to dive into this too much. Again, we have other video content mainly focused on this, but this would be where we would be positioning our part and fixture on the physical machine. So we could skip over that because the last thing we want to do is jump to our post-process tab. Now, this is where we can give stuff program numbers, program names, the comments, anything and everything. So as you guys are going to see here right off the rip, a pro tip to a lot of you out there, I like to use the last 3 digits of my part number, and then my 4th digit is usually my setup. So let's say this part is going to be 9991. So this is part number ending in 999, and then setup 1. Again, we can give this a comment. We could simply say this is setup 1 for 999. And then lastly, you're going to notice that my machine WCS might look different than what you guys have right now. And the reason for that is because my post processor has the ability to automatically show me standard versus extended work offset addresses. Now, this is not a big deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unselect machine so you guys can see this. My position tab has disappeared, but now you're dealing with WCS offsets of just standard numbers. Again, this is a large issue that I see where a lot of people go in and what they do is they want to plug in 54 here. Well, the problem is this is going to be offset 54 plus 54, which is why in some cases you end up with 154. I think it's like P38 or something. So just keep in mind, again, this depends on your machine post, but 1 is 54, 2 is 55, so forth and so on. Now, one thing that you may have on your guys' side is this may be set to 0. I would highly recommend at the bare minimum, we change that to 1. And you can actually save that as a user default here by clicking dots. So another use case here in setup that's very common, we see it quite a bit. Let's say I want to run the same part across 3 separate addresses or 3 separate work offsets. Again, we could do a multiple WCS offset, and then I can plug in that number 3 and then we're increasing by 1. So what does that mean? Well, we're now using 54, 55, and 56. Same G code, same toolpaths, all of that set up. And then we can lastly change how we're ordering. So again, this is the thing that I love about Fusion is if you had questions and you need to sit down and answer them, is in short, preserve order means complete the first part before moving to the second part. Now, order by operation means just do everything in the order of operations list. For example, face 54, face 55, face 56. So lastly, we could order by tool, which means you have a 1/2 inch end mill that's doing some roughing and finishing. We could rough finish on 54, rough finish on 55, rough finish on 56. Again, very handy when you're trying to squeeze down cycle times. More commonly than not, for a lot of you, you're going to order by tool if you wanted to use multiple. So again, I'm going to go ahead and turn this off, and we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And now for some of you out there, you're probably wondering, why did my stuff reorientate? Why did everything disappear? This is a common thing that we see is this is a default setting I would highly recommend. It's down at the bottom center of your screen. You have this little circular arrow, synchronize active setup. I would highly recommend checking all of these boxes. And that is what is controlling basically anytime we hit the active button on our setup over here on the left, it's automatically going to zoom in and turn on or turn off the different items as needed. So again, like I told you guys, we're going to go back and we're going to make some changes to our setup now. So one thing is I want to add in my fixture. So there is multiple ways to do things inside of Fusion. I'm a big fan of double clicking the icon. And again, not the green check mark, not the eyeball, but the icon that's that little folder with a cube. As you can see, I've now opened up my setup box. You could also right click and edit that same setup. So again, this is a common problem I see with people is they get a little two click happy and they think, oh, I want to edit my setup, but they continuously go back and keep creating new setup, right? You got to make that distinction that we're looking to edit a current setup. We're not looking to add another setup quite yet. So as I told you guys, we're going to go ahead and go to fixture, navigating over to our design tree. Again, using the little drop down arrows to expand things out. This time round, I'm going to click my fixture. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And as you guys can see now is if I get moved a little crazy and I get lost, if I click my little circular dot next to my setup, it's automatically turned on that fixture and reorientated me to that part. So let's go ahead and pivot now as I am going to go in and do my second setup, right? So by second setup, you guys are going to possibly notice here is I've started creating setups already. There's ones on this file that I deleted. So I'm going to go ahead and lastly, I'm just going to relabel this one. This is mill setup 1. And this is going to come in handy when we talk about post-processing later. But as you guys can see, you can relabel these things as you go. So again, we're going to go in and we're going to hit setup. As you guys are going to see is my machine. If I have a machine, it will automatically pull it through. Again, in this case, I'm going to remove it, but I'm going to walk through the process one more time. So again, we are doing milling. I would like to go ahead and do my model orientation. Uh-oh. Nothing is always good as when we get that lovely lock up here. I do know on my side I have a Windows update pending and my DPI scaling really messes with Fusion. We'll give this a couple of seconds and we'll pull it back up. In the meantime, you guys have any questions, feel free to throw them in chat. I also will let you know that if you guys are seeing anything that you do completely like at the end of the day, you can like and subscribe, of course, this content as we are going to be walking through again more and more Fusion content, more and more different settings inside of Fusion that we highly recommend. And we're really slowing down this pace based on that information. So give me a second here real quick. My Fusion is deciding, and I've had this problem since the last Windows update. I want to make that clear, guys. I saw this since the last Windows update where something with DPI scaling has changed. And we're going to give it a few more moments here before I commit to a good old-fashioned restart. And I think we are back. We are back. So I didn't have to actually reboot anything. As you guys can see, again, we're still in our setup screen. This is now setup 3 in my case. Yours might say setup 2. That's okay. We're going to go ahead and go down. We're going to pick our Z and our X. Now this time, again, using my design tree, it's very handy because I might actually pull Z off the back of my part. Now, given this is set up to, I may or may not want my X to be a different direction. So again, as you guys are seeing, I'm a big fan of using faces if you can, versus using the edges to define your X axis direction. So here's a good example of me picking the edge for X. I need to go ahead and flip that. Now, for those of you that have been new to machining or you're a common expert, usually when we move to a setup 2, we want to define whatever we are doing off of the model or our second work offset. So this time, instead of using a stock origin, I would like to use possibly a model origin. Now, what that model origin is going to allow me to do, and this is, again, Autodesk, I know you guys love our content, feel free to move the model wording up above this because we can't do anything with model origin until we define the model. So again, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and click where it says model. I'm going to move over to the left. Again, we're going to grab that 2D over to part. And from there, I am actually mistaken. I am leading you in the wrong way. I meant to say model box point. 100% on me. But as you guys are going to see right now, it's a little ugly looking, where I would still recommend that we go down and we define our model on that 2D part. And then we can go back up. And as you guys can see, my nodes now for defining that location are based on the outer box point of my model. So again, this is very handy if we were going to flip this part over and we were going to, utilize maybe the back left corner once we face this part off and get it to our proper thickness. Again, we could go bottom left corner. I know some of you out there are probably advanced machinists that you're new to Fusion, questioning why I'm doing this part upside down. And that's okay, because we can fix all this on the go and we can go back and visit that. But again, all I'm trying to do is define, based on those nodes, the location of where on the model box point do I want it. Now, had you gone in and set model origin, as you guys will see, is that model origin is based on my, again, origin of my actual part over here on the left. So if I turn on my origin, you guys, it might be a little tricky for you to see. Let me see if I can get my part. There's what's called an origin of the model itself. So again, we don't want model origin. We actually want to utilize that model box point. And again, you're going to pick the location that you want. In this case, let's say we're going to go ahead and go top dead center. So again, moving a little bit further down, we've already defined our model to make it easier to select our nodes. And then from there is no fixture in this part for setup 2. So we could do my favorite thing, which is turn the page over to stock. Now, this time around, anything that happens in our first setup, we would like that stock to push through into our second setup, right? So this is where I recommend to anybody and everybody, it should be showing from preceding setup automatically. Now you're going to want to check this box for continuous rest machining. And you're going to want to click these 3 little dots and save as user default. Because unless you have really, really bad computer performance, you're really never going to uncheck this box. Again, as you guys can see, we go ahead and check that box and we save that as a user default. And our stock process for setup 2 has become extremely easy. So again, we're going to go ahead and jump over to the old post process tab. And if you guys can guess from watching my first setup, this is where we're going to go 9992. Again, however, we're going to milling setup 2. And then from there, I'm going to actually place this on work offset 2. So again, if you're more of a production shop and you want to run setup 1 in your left vise and setup 2 in your right vise, we're accommodating that right now. So this is actually going to run under 55. So again, we're going to hit OK. And from here, I just like to label stuff just to make life easy. And then I think at the end of the day, yours truly actually going to go into this post process. Yep, setup 1 for 999. So that's what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually change to the post process setup 2 for 999. So again, we have a little bit of a uniformity here, as you guys can see. So to see the continuous rest machining in action, as you guys are going to see, is I'm going to show you that you can jump from setup to setup at any time by clicking on that dot. Now, if you've noticed, my part has flipped over back to the other side. Again, If I click that, it's going to go back to my second setup. So I'm going to just apply a simple toolpath. We will dive into toolpaths as the weeks progress here, but I'm just going to go ahead and do a adaptive clearing on this part. And the tool itself doesn't really matter. But the point is, as you guys are going to see here, you get a brief taste of what rule number 2 is, which is when in doubt, okay your way out. But again, I activate setup 2. And as you guys can see, everything that has been machined in setup 1 has automatically come over into setup 2. Now, as a refresher, what I'm going to do at this point is we're going to kind of leave this here. And you're welcome. Again, hit that like and subscribe button. We also have a buy me a beer program if you found this useful. But I'm going to go ahead and delete my setups. And I'm just going to do this all from the top with a little bit quicker speed this time. And we're actually going to do it the proper way, which would be to mill the back of this part and then flip it over and mill the front side of the part. So again, we go back up to setup. We're going to hit new setup. Again, you're seeing setup 4 now. These are in sequential order. So we're going to go ahead and use the machine. I'm going to jump down here to my orientation. So we're going to go ahead and pick my Z-axis off my table, but I want it flipped the opposite way. Now my stock box point, this is going to look a little different at first because again, the idea is our part is going to sit this way and I'm going to use top dead center. My model is going to come from my setup. And then from there, we're not going to have a fixture. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn my fixture off just so that it's out of the way. And again, we have our stock fixed size box and we can adjust that size to whatever it's going to be. So let's say 24.5. And this time we're actually going to deal with a width of 5 still. Let's just make it a little thicker at 325. Lastly, offset from top. As you guys can see, we're going to go ahead and give that maybe 50 thou this time to skim off the top of our part. Again, part position does not matter right now because we don't have a physical machine simulation, even though we are selecting a machine. And lastly, we go to our post-processing. Let's say this time it's 8881. Setup 1 for 888. Again, because I selected my machine, I now have my WCS locations. And again, now this is up to you. Sometimes you like to just jump into doing your CAM toolpaths. That's fine. I've started to practice utilizing a new setup or creating my different setups along the way ahead of time just to make my life easy. So again, let's say this time I'm going to do a new setup. And however, even though Z is the right way, let's say I needed to do a setup this direction. Again, there's my Z, there's my X. And I'm going to use a model box point off this corner because I want to mill this slot in. I don't want to use a T-slot cutter later. And as you're seeing me do this in a very quick pattern, is again, we're going to go ahead and define our model. Our stock is going to be from preceding. Again, position doesn't matter. And we can go ahead and label out this any way we want. So again, you guys are seeing me do setup 2 for 888. Again, we're going to move this over to possibly 55. As you guys are seeing, I'm just going through and creating those different setups. Again, we can label those for whatever we want, right? Again, this is setup 1. This one will be setup 2. Sorry there, I double clicked off the side of this. And lastly, we could create our third setup. So again, as you guys are seeing this in a real time, we go ahead and make sure we're still doing milling. This is controlled at the end of the day by what tab you're in. So again, we'll move down a little bit further. We're going to go ahead and select our Z axis. I'm going to actually use the bottom and flip up versus the table. Again, we can go off of a model box point. So this might actually want to be the bottom back left corner because we're sitting down on the table. So why try to find a Z height if we could just probe or touch our WCS off the table and work upwards? Again, our model needs to be that same component. We're always using the same component. The component name has a very big part in everything we do. Again, we jump down to fixture. We go ahead and select our fixture as well. Our stock is from preceding. Position does not matter. And from here, we're going to go ahead and go into 8883. I'm not going to bore you guys with a ton of stuff here, but let's get it over onto 56. And then, of course, as you guys have seen, we're going to go ahead and just throw a couple of toolpaths at some of these. But let's say I'm starting with setup 1. I'm going to go ahead and just do my adaptive clearing again. And then we're going to go ahead and take that toolpath and copy. Go to setup 2. We're going to go ahead and paste this in. All I'm trying to do at the end of the day is just get you guys in that mindset that this is why it is so important to go through and create these different tool paths, and why your setup is actually there to get everything perfect so that when you hit the machine, as you guys are seeing, failing to paste something before I generate it, but just like that, setup 1, right? It's just nothing more than a block on our machine. We roughed around the outside, and now we have my favorite thing, which is the hat. We go to setup 2, where we stand it up on its side. Our continuous rest machining has picked up on that stock, brought it through with the hat. Our adaptive clearing, of course, is probably doing way too much for what we're doing right now. Again, we'll dive into toolpaths later as we go. And then lastly, we go to our third setup. And as you guys can see, again, because that adaptive clearing from the side did so much damage, shouldn't say damage. Damage is probably not the right word, but a continuous rest machining of our next roughing toolpath has come through automatically and just picked up on things like the big old chunk of material over here. And right now, just a foreshadowing for a lot of you, fixture detection has even recognized that we don't want to machine where those clamps are. So let me know, guys. Do you guys like content like this? Do you want to see more content like this at the end of the day? Feel free to leave us a comment. You can also use the support information down below to let us know. What is it that you guys want to see? What is your main gripes and complaints? We will see you guys again on Wednesday as well. Every Friday, we do have a free support Friday where we open up the floor to everything from simple to complex problems inside of Fusion. And as we like to say over here, it's not what you know, it's who you know. You all know Fusion, Phil. We're here to help. And that's why we're bringing you latest and greatest content like this. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday. And I look forward to seeing you guys possibly tomorrow on Tuesday, because we might be doing the same thing all over again, returning Tuesday. Why not bring back another legend, right? But as always, guys, have a good one. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.